World of Warfare presents America Enters World War II. After Hitler's 1939 invasion of Poland and the Nazis' subsequent blitzkrieg invasions across Europe, an American nation once divided over the issue of isolationism versus intervention began to realize that the latter was inevitable, given the clear good against evil reflection of unprovoked Axis aggression. As a result, on October 16, 1940, all American men between the ages of 21 and 35 were required to register for the nation's first peacetime selective service draft on what became known as R Day.
You have the confidence and the gratitude and the love of your countrymen. We are all with you in the task which enlists the services of all Americans, the task of keeping the peace in this new world of ours.
The level of patriotic cooperation became instantly notable, as rich and poor, famous and unheralded, lined up as one at registration centers across the nation. 113,000 men queued up at 47 registration centers in the District of Columbia, despite the misery of a pounding cold rain. 500,000 queued in Chicago, where examiners asked each man a dozen questions, noting a registrant's build as slender, medium, or stout, while recording a registrant's race as white, Negro, Oriental, Indian, or Filipino. Each man was handed a wallet-sized draft card that quickly became a form of valid identification as a man's legal or illegal status for the purchase of alcohol. Journalists followed the registration of famous actors, athletes, and financiers, including John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Don Amici, and heavyweight boxing champion Joe Louis, who made the front page of most national newspapers the following morning under the caption, "He's a fighter for you, Uncle Sam." As the day wore on, 500 World War I veterans delivered a 10-gallon fishbowl into Philadelphia's Independence Hall, the same one used during the World War I draft of 1919, where a blindfolded Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, pulled celluloid capsules from the fishbowl before handing them one by one to FDR. The first number drawn was 158, and while many American men were drafted into the military with each successive lottery draw, the lingering effects of the Great Depression witnessed more than 71,000 unemployed American men volunteer for military service during the early weeks of the draft, hoping for training in future careers ranging from cooks to mechanics to pilots, making Registration Day a defining step toward America's eventual entry into the Second World War. On the day of his third inauguration as President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt scribbled a quite famous note to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. "Sail on, O ship of state, sail on, O Union strong and great. Humanity with all its fears, with all the hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate, as ever yours, Franklin D. Roosevelt." In January of 1941, when Roosevelt scribbled that note, Churchill's Britain stood alone against totalitarian dictators. Before 1941 was half over, the Soviet Union was locked in a titanic struggle with Hitler's Germany. Before the year was out, humanity, with all the hope of future years, would be hanging on the fate of FDR's great yet still emerging nation. Compelled to join the struggle by what he termed a date which will live in infamy, Japan did not declare war on the United States, nor did Japan want to wage war with the United States, for Japan knew that it could never win such a war. What Japan wanted was to nullify American power just long enough to grab such a strong bargaining position it would walk enriched from peace talks. That meant a preemptive strike designed to keep American naval power out of Japan's geographic theater of interest. Because of the wide ocean separating that theater from the continental United States, power in pre-war Asia meant naval power. This was the sole reason that focused Japan's war leaders on the closest significant American naval base to their home islands, the great naval installation at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the American Army was rated 18th in the world, behind that of Czechoslovakia, a country that had offered Hitler no resistance. Yet the 18th world military power possessed one of the most powerful navies in the world, which meant that if the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor could be crippled, then Japan could carry out its expansionist aspirations, the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Lack of natural resources, particularly oil, was the engine that drove Japan's thirst for expansion. Created primarily as a propaganda conceit on the part of Japan, the nation's leaders named their expansionist efforts in Asia the Southern Resources Area, in an attempt to lessen the perception of their land-grabbing aggression. Following the occupation of Indochina, the United States had imposed an oil embargo in an attempt to curb Japan's expansionist aggression, which denied the island nation of 90% of her oil imports. After the Japanese Navy calculated that it would run out of oil within a year, the decision to strike American naval assets and personnel at Pearl became priority number one. Tasked with launching the offensive, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of Japan's combined fleet, prophetically said, "In the first 6 to 12 months of war with the United States and Britain, I will run wild and win victory after victory. After that, I have no expectation of success." The fleet sailed on a sweeping northern course, hoping to avoid detection by patrolling aircraft or ships, until Yamamoto sent the go signal. Mount Yushan on Taiwan was the highest peak in the Japanese Empire. "Yushan Yamanobori," the message said, "climb Mount Yushan." With absolute surprise, 353 Japanese aircraft began their attack at 0748 hours local time on December 7th of 1941. The incoming aircraft had been picked up on radar, but the warning had been ignored, since it was wrongly assumed that they were American bombers arriving from California, which had become a Sunday ritual for months now. Instead, servicemen and locals at Pearl Harbor and Honolulu witnessed a punishing, unprovoked attack by the Empire of Japan. The two-wave attack was over in less than 2 hours, crippling or destroying nearly 19 American ships and more than 188 aircraft, taking the lives of 2,403 sailors and soldiers, while wounding an additional 1,178 people. During the attack, to heap misfortune upon misfortune, a day earlier, the Navy had undertaken a large-scale air defense exercise before giving anti-aircraft crews town leave beginning on the evening of December 6th, leaving the defense of Pearl Harbor in the hands of 5-inch naval guns, which were designed to engage surface targets rather than Japanese dive bombers. During the heat of battle, both time-fused and contact artillery shells took over the role of Honolulu's idled anti-aircraft batteries, and while 55 Japanese airmen were killed during the attack, civilian casualties in Honolulu and elsewhere took direct hits by the fusillade of shells that missed enemy targets and landed in the streets surrounding Pearl Harbor. Of more lasting consequence, Pearl Harbor's great oil storage installation had not been attacked, while 2 American aircraft carriers had been at sea during the attack. Another blessing in disguise was Pearl Harbor's shallow depth, which in most cases simply grounded damaged ships that would later be salvaged and recommissioned. As more than 2,000 American soldiers and sailors lay dead among the burned ruins of Pearl Harbor's battleships, planes, and airfields, President Franklin D. Roosevelt knew that there could be but one response.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Less than 24 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress, delivering an impassioned oratorical display that demanded a declaration of war against Japan.
The unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Within an hour after his speech, Roosevelt had his declaration of war. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, who in turn declared war on all Axis powers. Across the nation, young men poured into recruiting stations, eager to stick it to the enemy. Hollywood became a contributing propaganda arm, stirring the fires of patriotism with movies promoting the war effort.
Don't kid yourself. The doc says I'm in perfect shape.
That's the stuff, Harry. Stick around. I'll be right with you.
You mean you're joining up?
Well, sure. They can't keep me out now. Next!
By early 1942, America implemented a rationing system, everything from rubber to gasoline, butter and bread. Leisure time was slashed dramatically as a nation came together to build the machines necessary for an Allied victory.
We are now in this war. We're all in it, all the way. Every single man, woman, and child is a partner in the most tremendous undertaking of our American history.
On December 8, 1941, the United States joined a war that by its very breadth and scope would cost the lives of 60 million people, while ultimately excising a gruesome evil. At war's end, 4 long years later, life in America and around the world would never be the same. With able-bodied American men fighting the war in Europe and the Pacific, by 1943, women stepped up to fill the labor vacuum, making up 1/3 of the American labor force during World War II. 20 million women went to work outside the home, not just at typewriters and sewing machines, but in jobs that had long been considered the exclusive domain of men. During the war, almost 15,000 workers were killed or permanently disabled in industrial accidents, with another 3 million injured. It was a dangerous environment for both men and women alike, but that was something the government and newsreels didn't want to talk about. Instead, the emphasis was on patriotism and determination, and in a manner peculiar to the times, sex. Rosie the Riveter, as women workers became known, were iconized first in 1942 by Westinghouse artist J. Howard Miller, whose poster showed a determined woman under the slogan, "We can do it." Norman Rockwell's 1943 Saturday Evening Post cover further cemented women's vital role in the war effort. Rockwell's Rosie was brawny and tough, and when compared to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel depiction of the prophet Isaiah, the likenesses between Rosie and Isaiah become crystal clear. The mythology behind Rosie the Riveter was further amplified in a 1943 song by Red Evans and John Jacob Loeb, which cemented the patriotic dedication of women supporting the war effort through their own labor and determination. Most working Rosies didn't realize it at the time, but this first mass wave of women in the workforce was the beginning of the women's liberation movement, proving that women could do a man's job and hold their own in any work environment. Since war's end, many Rosies recall that they felt good about what they were doing, along with a special bond between the women who each felt that they were doing their part to bring an end to Nazi and Japanese aggression. When Allied troops landed at Normandy during the D-Day invasions of France, the invasion force included 50,000 vehicles of all types, well over 5,000 ships, and more than twice that number in airplanes. While many factors led up to victory, in both theaters of war, one key element was the ability of American industry to outbuild Germany and Japan in the largest mechanized war the world has ever seen. Detroit automakers played a key role in the Allies' victory when they switched from building cars to building the machinery of modern warfare. For example, Ford's enormous Willow Run plant produced a total of 8,685 B-24 heavy bombers, outputting 1 plane per hour by early 1945. Due to the use of interchangeable parts, Willys Overland, Ford, and Bantam produced more than 1.3 million Jeeps, or Blitz buggies as they were affectionately known. Just before his death in 1945, famed war correspondent Ernie Pyle wrote of the Jeep, "Good Lord, I don't think we could continue the war without the Jeep. It does everything, it goes everywhere. It's as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, and as agile as a goat." Detroit also provided the war effort with a steady supply of tanks from Chrysler's enormous Detroit Arsenal tank plant, including 3,352 M3 tanks and 17,947 M4 Sherman Series tanks, or approximately 36% of the total 49,234 Sherman tanks built for the war effort. General Motors also joined the fight by constructing 21,000 amphibious landing craft known as duck boats, costing the U.S. government $10,800 for each amphibious vehicle rolling off GM's assembly lines. GM also produced an arsenal of other war materiel, including nearly 120 million artillery shells, over 39 million cartridge casings, 206,000 aircraft engines, 13,000 Navy fighter planes, 854,000 transport trucks, and nearly 2 million machine guns. With the fate of the free world at stake, Detroit and its surrounding industrial communities played heavily into America's quest to outbuild Hitler and Hirohito, allowing American industrial might to play a starring role in the Allies' eventual victories over Nazi and Japanese aggression.